Hey everyone, this is Miyoko and welcome to my Art Heart Monday series. This is a vlog that's meant to be from a beginning intermediate artist for other beginning intermediate artists. I did take a break from posting yesterday due to Christmas, but I am posting one today, so I hope that's okay with everyone. I mentioned this in the last video, but I wanted to talk about my relationship with Crayola. I've lived for so long thinking that I'd be able to create art using only cheap art supplies like Crayola, Prang, and not rose art. No one deserves rose art. And I further pushed my narrative by watching Crayola or cheap art supply challenge videos on YouTube. I stupidly invested so much cash into Crayola and cheap art supplies that I didn't realize that my skills reached a point where working with that medium was actually hindering my ability to create good art. Now, don't get me wrong, Crayola is a great place to start if you don't have any money to invest in your art. It's cheap, it's accessible, meaning you can buy it anywhere, and because they're cheap and accessible, you're not as worried about ruining your markers. You can do crazy things with your markers like, practice blending, coloring your paper to like full saturation because they're, like I said, they're just cheap and they're accessible. And Crayola can actually teach beginning artists a lot. So some really important things that I learned from Crayola: color charts, are important because the color of the cap essentially means nothing. How colors can and cannot work together, the importance of the weight of the paper that you use in relation to your medium, for example, using Crayola markers on printing paper versus cardboard versus sketchbooks, and what poor art supplies can do to a piece that you're really proud of. In my case, almost all of the time, if I really like something that I created, Crayola would ruin it. So these were some stumbling blocks that I had to overcome. But while I was learning how to work with Crayola, I was also, working on my art, my line art and my anatomy. So eventually I reached this point where my line art was suffering at the hands of Crayola. I actually assumed that my art was suffering because I lacked skill, but that wasn't the case at all. I was using cheap materials and it was preventing me from moving forward. So when I finally made the decision to buy higher quality materials because I was in a position where I could actually purchase them and I wanted to find a way to move forward with my art, it was actually one of the most pivotal investments in my own art because I was able to move away from the thought that I was restricted to cheap art supplies. I was stunting my growth by only using Crayola markers and cheap art supplies. I really wasn't able to learn really important things like how markers should be blending together and how to layer colors. If you've ever worked with Crayola markers, you know that they can't really blend and they don't layer very well. Unless you sort of like have workarounds. Like I've seen some artists use, what they've done is that they dilute Crayola using, water, or they they use a paintbrush, like a watercolor paintbrush, and then paint using the marker as like the as a way to get color without necessarily like oversaturating the paper. But these are workarounds for Crayola. If you're just working with straight Crayola, like layering and blending are things you really can't learn from that medium. And this is not to say that everyone has to start with Crayola too. If you can afford to start with student grade supplies, then you should start with student grade supplies. If I had started with Copics or Winsor & Newton markers, I'm sure I would have learned things more efficiently, as long as I wasn't paralyzed at the thought of using expensive markers. I'm sure some of you feel this as well, but when I have expensive things, I don't like to use them very often because they're expensive, and so I should save them for a really important time, but by the time that I get to it, like, it's dry and it's a waste. But if you can actually go ahead and like use the markers without any fear, then you should invest in them. Or not necessarily markers, but invest in higher grade art supplies. But I know that some of you are probably in the same situation that I used to be in, so I want to let you all know that there's no shame in using Crayola and learning through Crayola. Again, it's a great place to start for those of us who can't afford $50+ on art supplies, and you can still learn a lot. So this is why I have this love-hate relationship with Crayola. There's so much that it taught me, but I also felt like it trapped me a little bit. Like, I continued to invest in cheap art supplies when I was at a point that I should have just saved my money and bought like better quality materials. So please learn from me. If you feel like your art should look great but it doesn't, it might be a time to buy better art supplies, especially if it's in your ability to do so. Or you should save up to buy better art supplies. So let me know what you think about this video by commenting down below. How do you feel about Crayola and other low quality materials for both learning and for YouTube challenges? Are there things that you wish you had done when it came to cheap art supplies? I'd be more than happy to read your comments down below. So keep doing your best, and I'll see you next time!